We screwed up everything the way that God had created. We're all part of the Adams family as a result. The good news is God intervened, and in Jesus wasn't prepared to leave us that way, wasn't prepared to leave us broken and undone, but made a way for us to reconnect with him. And this is what you can see in our logo. Although our lives represent all these broken pieces, as we come to the cross of Jesus, he goes to work making all things new. Every week we say there's prayer available up the front. If today you have this sense that, hey, I need some of that newness from God, well then come and seek out prayer. Come and seek out help. Don't go away with that thing undone in your life. Speaking of freedom, we've started a series called 10 Steps to Freedom. We started last week. Today is step 2. We're considering Exodus chapter 20, which we now call the 10 Commandments. And last week we questioned whether it's fair, actually, to equate freedom with commandments. Liberty and rules, Jono, seriously? How do they have any connection at all? Aren't they polar opposites? What have the 10 Commandments got to do with freedom? Well, we need to broaden the question a little, and we did this last week in our intro, asking this thing, and I'm repeating it in case you missed. Where's freedom found? Where's freedom actually found? Have you stopped and investigated your own life? You probably don't even look any further than that. Because often in life, the things that are the bright flashing lights that you think are going to contain so much satisfaction and joy are actually the biggest letdowns. And freedom is found in the will of God. Never the bright flashing lights, the razzle-dazzle of life, but actually when we do God's will, we find our life is most free. And the reason people end up with their lives trapped in the likes of drug addiction is because what presents in life like fun, actually the fruit on the other side of that decision is actually bondage. And we need to get wise to have the foresight to see that, don't we? Sometimes we just keep taking that carrot without stopping and reflecting, what's that decision leading me towards? Is it freedom or is it bondage? 1 John 5 offers surprising insight into the commandments of God, at least into perhaps the traditional way we might think of them, like they're limiting. No, it says it's actually how we show our love for God, by keeping his commandments, as you can see on this verse on screen. And his commandments are not designed to be a burden. They're not designed to be a killjoy. They're not out to limit your life. They actually help set your life free. And we need to reject this kind of worldview that says the God of the Old Testament, he was just all into rules. And as long as you kept the rule book, he was happy, because it's just not true. Read it again, and over again you'll see this God complaining that his people are good at honouring with their lips. They were good singers. But he says, if your hearts are far from me, I'm not interested in that kind of worship. And the God of the New Testament, might I say, is also interested in our conduct. It's not as though it's just a heart thing. It's got to be transferred then into our action, into the choices we make that show our love for God. So rather than 10 steps to freedom being deceptive, maybe we need to revisit our version of freedom and ask what really is freedom and how do we get there? Because I see the treasure God has placed here in Exodus that's over 3,000 years old is more value to us than today's newspaper is. Last week we spoke about step to freedom number 1, God and God alone. That was the command that says, have no other gods before me. And we saw in the context of which Israel was operating how that was actually a freeing thing for them to worship the one true God. Today we continue on with step 2, which has a connection with the first one, and it's all about worship. Now, modern worship in the modern church has kind of been framed like this, and you can hardly even see it, but it's a dark room with people with their hands in the air. Can I just say, after being in the kids' corner today, helping Laura with the kids, if that's what modern worship is, if that's what true worship is, then every young parent with young children is going to fail, because it's pretty hard to have your hands like this when you start hearing a child cry. In terms of the quality or quantity of our worship, I wonder how you feel about yours today. Do you kind of live under this shadow that it's not good enough? I think we live under that shadow with much of our life. We could always feel like we could be doing much better, much more, much holier living than we are right now. One of the comments in our recent church review that came out was, it would be good to see more prayer in the church. Now, if that was your comment, that's fine. We don't know who made the comment, so anonymous. But I agree. We could have more prayer in our church. My question is, how much more? If we added 2 hours more prayer to our corporate church, would that feel like enough? Or would we be then saying, well, we could still do with more? I have a hunch we'd be always saying we could do with more. We could do with more. No matter what our kind of space is in the present time, there's this feeling like we could be doing better, we could be doing more. If we're not careful, we live our whole Christian life under this big cloud of guilt because we always feel like we should be doing more. Who's willing to stand up right now and say, I did enough Bible reading this week? We feel like it would be arrogant to make that claim, don't we? We always should be doing more. Who's giving enough right now to alleviate worldwide poverty? Who in the room feels they're doing enough? We don't, do we? We always feel like we could be doing more. So are we just a failure at this Christianity thing? Should we just throw our arms in the air and say, it doesn't work for me? Because I wonder, if we think about worship, how many of us feel like we're hitting the mark right now? We're good worshippers. Today I want you to see with me as we journey through. I'm going to make a statement up front, and then I'm hoping to prove it to you in the next 30 minutes. You're an expert worshipper. I think you're very, very, very good at worship. I think it's impossible not to be good at worship. And I'll explain that as we go through. Let's read Exodus chapter 20. And we're continuing on with 10 Steps of Freedom. And we'll just read the first 2 this morning. Exodus 20. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. That's really good just to stop there and recognize that all these commandments are framed around the context of freedom. God has already set his people free. See that? This isn't about how to get free. They were already set free. God wanted them to maintain, to live in, to enjoy this freedom. And that's the context of the 10 Commandments. God's people are already free. We spoke last week about how monotheism was a radical idea because they were drawn from Egypt that had hundreds and hundreds of God options, and monotheism, having only one true God, made life all the more simple. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. And may the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word. So we see this first 2 commandments, we see actually share a lot of DNA. Almost seems to be an expansion of the first one, which backs up Jeff Mannion's claim that we spoke of last week. Command 1 holds the key to the rest. If we get command 1 in order, it unlocks the rest of these for us. So as we embrace commandment 1, God and God alone, we reject all idols, which is the application of 1. And this number 2 then is a practical outworking of that, the practical outworking of the decision we've made in command 1. We've adopted a monotheistic worldview. There's only one God. So here's what that would look like. We reject all cheap imitations. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? If you accept command 1, it's a direct flow and a logical thing to reject all idols. Kevin DeYoung offers this insight. The first commandment is don't worship the wrong God. The second commandment is don't worship the wrong way. Don't worship the wrong God. And then this one is about don't worship the wrong way. This particular command has a lot more detail than some of the others, command 2. If we compare it to command 1, for example, the major difference is the amount of words. Command 1 had 8. Command 2 here's got 84 words, so it's got 10 times the amount of material as the first one we looked at. Don't worry, it doesn't mean the sermon's going to go 10 times as long as last week. Just like command 1, command 2 here has an intelligent reason behind it. It gives us a why. In command 1, the why was, I've rescued you. I've pulled you up out of slavery, so therefore have no other gods before me. And we looked at this claim God has towards exclusivity, and we looked at how Jesus carries that on into John 14:6, where he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And I mentioned Erwin McManus's interview, how he was asked, isn't it arrogant to say there's only one way to God, that Jesus is the only way? And Erwin's response was, he's the only God coming after you. He's the only God coming after you. He's the only God coming to rescue you. He's the only one serving you. He's the only God on your side, actually. So that was the reasoning behind command 1. God had shown himself trustworthy to his people. Command 2 also has justification here. It's a lesser-known quality of God, but look at it. It says, I'm jealous. That's the reason. That's the reason you should have no other idols, because of my jealousy. I get jealous, God says. I have no tolerance for competition when it comes to love. God is unwilling to share his affection with anyone else. He wants to dance alone. He wants to dance alone. And so we have this call here again for God's people to be distinctively his. Don't be like the other nations who have hundreds of God options. No, I'm your one and only, says Yahweh to Israel. Look to me. So we see here how command 2 expands on 1. Don't adopt idols, which is really the first one. And number 2 is don't invent them either. Don't think you can start coming up with your own brand of gods since you've left behind all the rest. They weren't create their own version. The instruction was first, don't accept anyone else's. But just to be super clear, this isn't an opportunity. You don't fill up the void that's been created with your own brand. No. Making an idol is to fashion a God in our own image. And French philosopher says this, Voltaire, in the beginning, God created man in his own image, and man has been trying to repay the favour ever since. What does God think of that? Well, it's grossly offensive to God. He says, don't do it. Don't go there. God's response is, no, thank you. I'm not looking for that kind of help. Don't waste your energy. Don't worship an idol, and don't carve out an idol. Don't create it. Now, the second commandment is a little bit confusing at this point because you think, oh, no. I've got an eagle carved out, hanging on the wall at home. I need to go home and burn it. Do you? Is that what this is saying? No, I don't think so. It's not saying God's people can't enjoy art. It's not saying if you've got a picture or a painting of a fish, you need to go home and destroy it. This is not what this commandment is about. It's about worshipping those things and using those things as an assistance to worship God. God says, don't do that. In fact, if we fast forward just 5 chapters in Exodus, we'd find God telling his people to carve out angelic images. So it wasn't as though you can't do this at all for enjoyment or for artistic purposes, but don't do it for the purpose of worshipping that image. And the Gospel of John tells us why. God is spirit. Those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. In other words, the image of material things as a worship focus is out of order, because God is spirit, and we must worship him in spirit and truth. Now, I don't know about you, but every time I hear that word, worship him in spirit and truth, my mind kind of goes, amen. I mean, I know it's in the Bible, but who knows what it means? I mean, it sounds very fuzzy to me. Worship God in spirit and truth. Essentially, God's saying here, whatever image you'll come up with will be inadequate. So don't even try. It won't represent me well enough. It'll fall short. So don't try and carve out me into a graven image. Israel was not only avoid the idols of the Egyptian nation they were drawn from, they were to reject the notion to begin their own collection. They weren't allowed to start a line of Ushis. They were to reject all kind of carved images that would replace the one true God. God says, don't dream up what I look like. Don't waste your energy there. Get on with worshipping me. So what about Australia? As you hear all this, if you're anything like me, you probably get to the point where you go, don't think it's a problem for us. I don't think we do that here in this nation. If you scan through the 10 steps to freedom in Exodus 20, I reckon you might kind of have a tendency to just tick number 2 and go, well, of all of the lists there, we're probably not in danger of that. We've probably got that one okay. I mean, when's the last time you were wandering through your neighbourhood and someone had this image in their garden, you know, Kevin the kangaroo, and they're bowing down saying, I worship you, Kevin, praying my prayers to you today. I mean, I haven't seen it. Have you seen anyone in your neighbourhood do that? Bow down to a graven image in recent times? I mean, we love our koalas, we love our emus, we love our kookaburras, but I aren't seeing people bowing down and worshipping those things. We use them as carvings and works of art, but objects of worship? Not really. I don't see much of it. Are we safe? Well, let me tell you this story. One of my favourite pastimes on my days off is to go what some people would call fishing. Now, if you listen well, you remember a few weeks ago I called it water watching, not fishing, right? Because fishing indicates there's fish involved, but water watching just means you can have a good day on the water. So if someone's going out to the river for a day, here's the appropriate question to ask at the end of the day. If they've returned home with yes, fishing rods and all of that sort of stuff, but if they've returned home and they're unpacking at the end of the day, here's the right question to ask. Did you have a good day? It's fine. Ask that question. It's very, very rude to ask, did you catch any fish? Don't dare do that to them. That's torment. So when I go out water watching, you know what I see? Every single time without fail, I see worship. I see people worshipping out there on the river. Let me explain what it looks like. There's a guy in a tinny about 8 foot long. He's got his hand on the motor at the back. In his other hand, he's often got a drink of his choice. He might have the dog at the front of the boat and a fishing line at the back of the boat. And he's cruising past and the wind's blowing in his hair. And can I tell you, he's discovered worship. He's worshipping. How can we say that? Because he's most alive in that moment. And he's got this look in his eye that doesn't even need to be verbalized. You can just tell from glancing at him, I was made for this. I was made for this. His body language is screaming that. He's worshipping. He's worshipping. John Piper says, God is most glorified when we are most satisfied in Him. God is most glorified. God is receiving the fullness of my worship when I'm most satisfied in Him. Now that I've repeated it, let me rephrase it. Whenever you scan across the recesses of someone's life and you find the hot spot of where their passion is, you've found what it is they're worshipping. You've found it. You've found their God. It might not be the one true God, but you've found their God. When you find the highest point of a passion in someone's life, you've found what they've made their God. Because passion is the hot spot. It's revealing. It shows it. They won't bow down to it. They won't use the lingo that we use at church, but we have found their God when we find their highest point of passion. See, the guy at the river that cruises past in the tinny, the last thing in his mind is church, and yet he's discovered true worship more so than some of us have here so far this morning. Because genuine worship is not about singing songs. Real worship is not about saying the right prayers. True worship is not a recipe. We follow this formula, one prayer, one song, then a reading, then another song. It's nothing like that. It's nothing like that. All those are just reflections of it. True worship is far more than that, but far less than that too. It's simply what we are really and truly giving our heart to. Where is our passion? It's that obsession we have for that thing. Whatever we put our highest priority on, when we're away from it, our mind keeps daydreaming back there and wishing we were there. Some Australians, it's their sport. Some it's their sexuality. It can be any sort of stuff. Idolatry is so normalised, I don't think we even spot it. We miss detecting the things that are in our lives that have crept up and taken a godlike place until it's too late. Clothes. All the husbands are doing this to their wives. Well, let's have it the other way. Cars. Shopping. Internet shopping. General interest. It's anything. Anything. It's when it moves from hobby to idol. But that shift happens so gradually, most of us don't even realise the needle's moved. We missed where the switch happened. We missed where it ticked over into being unhealthy. Hobby, okay. Idol, terrible. Yet we're talking about the same thing. It's just that our heart is thinking differently of that thing now. It's strangled God out. And we now serve that first above God. And I have enough trust of the people in this room to say, if you knew that was happening, you'd reject it. But we fall asleep, and it happens all around us. If we knew in advance this is what Satan is trying to distract my life towards, we would say, no, I will not put my hobby before my faith. No, I will not put my sporting team before my faith. No, I will not put career advancement before my faith. No, I will not put a felt need for romance before my faith. We would reject all of those things. But we drift there. And over time, these affect our loyalty to our Father. And we slid there without even realising we're in danger. Because the enemy of our soul, folks, will play the long game. He doesn't care how long it takes. As long as I'm drifting progressively away from God over time, that's fine with him. And I will always drift unless I'm making intentional choices to move towards. We say to ourselves, oh, well, it won't hurt to miss church for a day. I'm available to go to the game. It won't matter if I miss home group for a term. No big deal. I'll get back to it. Doesn't matter if I take a break from the roster to pursue that new thing. But over time, our loyalties get divided and our commitment wanes. And we lose our passion for God. They never announce their rival idols. They don't. They're very quiet until it's too late. Until they've kind of got their tentacles all around you. It's like, I think I'm trapped now. I'm sucking the life out of me. Satan will use anything. Anything. Usually good things. And that's why we didn't realize it was an idol. We just thought it was a hobby. We just thought it was a good new interest. Somehow it became an idol. Before this moment, you never even realized it was. But I've been praying the Spirit of God would touch us today and bring correction where we need it, because it sets us free when He does. We need to turn away from things that on the surface are innocent and look harmless, but we know different. We know they got our heart. We know they got far more of our attention than what they deserve. You say, Jono, are you trying to guilt me into having an interest outside of church? No. It's your call. You're accountable to God for your life, not me. Besides, this thing about idols is so specific, so nuanced. Because I can't decide what's an idol for you, and you can't decide what's an idol for me. That's not how this works. We're all got to bring our own life before the Lord and ask Him to direct us in this space. Some of you who have done the formation group for me will recognize this language on the screen. Self to crucify, self to deny, self to celebrate. I'll try and quickly explain. For some people, dancing should be a thing that's their past. It's something that when they come to Christ, they've got to lay down and let go. It's a self to crucify because, well, we'll put an extreme example out there. They were pole dancers. They used to strip for a living, and that's an ungodly thing. So when they come to Christ, they've got to let that go. They've got to lay it down. It's something to crucify. It's part of them, but it's part of their past now because of Jesus. Then there's other people who have dancing as a hobby. It's a fun thing for them. It has potential to be an idol, but it isn't. They've got it in order. It's just a once a week or once a month thing, and it's a fun for an hour, and it's no big deal. And as they honestly scan across their life, they say, never has this been a problem. Cool. There might be times where you still check it. We go, oh, that's getting a bit big in my life. I need to put a squeeze there and peel back a little bit. But it's a self to deny then. There's times where I miss dance because it involves me wanting to serve the Lord and be loyal to Him first. So it's a self to deny. It's something that I just expand or shrink depending on the situation and depending on the call of Jesus. It's not evil for me though. And then there's others who actually might have a calling to do dancing for a living. This is their very livelihood. This is a gift that God has put in their life. And they're supposed to celebrate that. It's a good thing for them. And it's a pursuit that God has gifted and put on them and called them to do. Can you see then how we can't just make these absolute claims and say, well, this is evil, this is wrong, this is... Well, no, there's some nuance in this. There's some wiggle room if the Holy Spirit allows you to. But you have to answer to Him, not me. We're already great worshippers, friends. We're made for this. Our hearts are made for God alone. And that's why idols have such great appeal. Because if we're not worshipping the one true God, that need in our life to give off worship has got to be directed somewhere. But it doesn't just dry up and die. It gets directed somewhere else. We're already great worshippers. There's no one in the room that's not living 100% devoted life to something. Everybody in this room today is living 100% devoted life to something. It may not be the one true God, but we are worshipping something. Something. Some of us go, well, Jono, I'm just not really into the church music. That's not the point. It's not what we're talking about here. This isn't a personality thing, and some of us are more expressive than others. I get that. Some of us are louder than others. Some of us worship in different ways. That's not the point. The more pertinent question is, when is your life at its loudest? When is your life at its loudest? What are you most excited about? If this is the version of you being fired up, what we see here on Sunday, that's cool. This is not a competition. You don't have to look like someone 3 rows across. It's not what this is about. This is about us being passionate and bringing an undivided heart to the one true God. We Australians have not forgotten how to worship. Let me remind you of last weekend.
The Tigers are premiers for the 12th time in their history.
Stay seated, you Richmond supporters. Okay, I've heard enough. We can fade it there. Don't tell me those guys aren't worshipping. You know, when I was in college, they said the future of the church will have no music. Australians don't like to sing anymore. I'm like, have you been to the football lately? We just need to find people's passion. They'll soon sing. They'll sing like they've never sung before. Check that out. Yellow and black. It hurts to see it again. Your life is not a worship void. Your life is not a worship void. You are a worship expert. Where are you directing it today? Are you directing your worship to the one true God? You say, where's the freedom in this, Jono? I thought this series was about freedom. Let me take you to your final day on earth. Let's say you've lived to 100. I'll put a safe number out there. We haven't got any 100-year-olds in the room, so I'm not cutting anyone's life short. You've turned 100 years old yesterday, and today's the day you die. I think many of us are going to arrive there and say, what did I live for? Why did I waste so much time? What's my life been all about? What's the point? And I live with this underlying fear that I'll get there and I'll have regret. And I'll look back at things and I'll go, I've built my house on sand. This is the freedom of this commandment. Exodus 20 says, this wholehearted blessing is not just about you. It'll flow down to your children and your children's children and your children's children, and on it goes. This week, I was moved by a picture from Bella riding, actually. I don't know how you'll go reading it, but this was unprovoked. Just one morning she got up. This is part of a worship song. Wave after wave crashing over me. It's messy, I know. She's learning to write. Wave after wave crashes over me. For you are for us, not against us. Talking about the grace of God. Wholehearted worship is the best legacy we could leave for our kids. And the freedom in that is knowing that my life is actually counting for something. It's not pointless. It's not worthless. I won't get to the final day and go, what a waste. I feel so empty. We'll know we've passed something valuable on. Who gets the credit for that? Where did Bella get that from? Yvonne and I. So am I big noting myself? No. My dad sits right there. If anyone deserves credit for that, it's him. But I can go back further. My two grandfathers were lay preachers, and that's about where my family history runs out. But do you get the point? Do you get the point? The blessing flows down. I know it's hard to bring kids to church. I got a little taste of that this morning sitting back there. But it's bigger than just today. It's bigger than just, well, it's tough to bring them when they're unsettled. It's bigger than all that. This is generational blessing that God's inviting us into as we bring our whole heart to Him. And it would be crazy to miss that. That would be a wasted life. Directing worship well has generational blessings. The blessing flows on to the 1000th generation. This is not a mathematical formula. It's talking about influence. Influence. Living our life in such a way that leaves an imprint. Sorry to end today on such a serious note. But sometimes I just think we need to let the Holy Spirit scan over our hearts. Say, Lord, I want to live a life that counts. I pray that that's your prayer today. And it's not about yesterday. You go, Jono, I've already raised my kids. I've done it wrong. What now? It's always about today. Move from today and move forward. So as the music team come, I'm going to close out in prayer. Why don't you stand as we're ready to sing our final song. God, you are so good. You are so gracious. We thank you. We thank you that your grace flows down. Thank you that someone brought it to us. And we thank you that we have the joy of passing it on. I pray right now against any condemnation that would come to anyone in this moment, or regret or feeling of shame. We break that in Jesus' name. And we ask that from this day forward, we would make every day count. And that we would be people who pass that blessing on. Lord, turn our eyes away from looking at worthless idols. Let us bring to you an undivided heart. Thank you, Father.